Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we are about to turn this franchise that we have run for 26 years over to somebody else. The Buffalo Wings, coming off of a brilliant season, 127-35 record, capped off by a World Series championship. And there's nothing really left for us to accomplish with this team. So in this episode, we're going to do a series recap, a series finale, so to speak. It's not actually going to be the last episode because after this, we will continue to sim forward for several more episodes, find out in a couple years whether Deshaun Seifu and possibly Shamar Jenneret are first ballot Hall of Famers. And then we're going to also sim forward and just see how the Buffalo Wings do over the next couple decades with different leadership and kind of follow all of our favorite players to see how their careers end up. So it has been a really fun run for the Buffalo Wings, and it's been made a lot more fun by all of you who have kind of participated in this year, watching the videos, sharing your comments, interacting back and forth with me. I do sincerely appreciate all of the interaction and viewing this year, and the comments and the discussions, the tips, the debates are all very interesting to me, very helpful, and thankful for all of you who have watched this series with us over the years, which is closing in on 270 episodes, which is absolutely crazy. It's been a fantastic run for the Buffalo Wings. Ended up playing 23 seasons in the major leagues, 26 seasons overall. But when you go back to the early days of this series, you'll remember that those first couple of seasons, we tried to do this as a realistic expansion. And we had teams in the minors the first 3 years, slowly building out our farm system and our organization. By 2026, we were playing in the majors. You can see we had very mediocre seasons those first 2 seasons in the majors in 2026 and 2027, barely avoiding the cellar in each season in the 8-team reorganized National League East with 32 total teams in baseball. But after those first couple of seasons, it became incredible, and we finish this year and our time as the manager and or GM in Buffalo with 21 consecutive playoff appearances, a major league best. We've also won 7 World Series total, and 4 of the last 5, 8 consecutive trips to the NLCS at this point. And we won 13 of the last 15 National League East titles. So it's been a fantastic run. The NLCS for a long time was our big problem. Even as recently as just 5 years ago, we only had a 3-6 record all time in the NLCS. But with a 4-1 record over our last 5 trips to the NLCS, we've evened our record to 7-7, as mathematically expected 500 in our 14 trips to the National League Championship Series. And in the World Series, it was really amazing. 7-0 in the World Series with this team. Nothing but dumb luck to have that type of track record. So certainly recognize that luck worked in our favor. Luck was a factor that worked in our favor in many ways during this playthrough. But we never actually made it to the World Series and lost, which is kind of cool. When all is said and done, a 612 winning percentage over those 23 seasons in the majors. You can see 2,282 wins, so we averaged 99 wins a season. And when all was said and done, there were 13 100-win seasons over the 23 seasons we had in Major League Baseball. And as I noted, we finished on a high note. We allowed a ridiculous 470 runs over the course of this season, which was by far the fewest runs we've ever allowed. And the 900 runs that we scored this season were the second most we've ever achieved, just 7 runs behind what we had in 2046. So we are going out with the best team in baseball doing really well, and hopefully the Buffalo Wings will continue their success next season and for many years beyond. We've kind of set things up the way we want. We've still got pretty solid scouting and player development budgets. We've got a situation where we're bringing back the guys that we want to bring back this season, in the upcoming season in 2049. 2050, as I've talked about, my plan would have been to opt out of the final year of Nehemiah Vidali's contract, and then also possibly opt out of Ishmael Velasco's contract. Certainly would not intend at this point to, if I can find him, looking right at him, certainly would not expect that we would exercise that almost $16 million final arbitration year. I guess it's not really exercising it. It's going to negotiations with Bobby Huntington, but probably signing him for somewhere in the low 15s. Probably would not do that either. So I think I've left a logical path for the franchise to get its salary back under $200 million the season after next. So not in a bad spot financially, but who knows how the AI is going to run things once I turn things over to them. And one of the things that has been talked about between me and our loyal viewers in recent months as we've progressed through this Buffalo Wings save is who's on the Mount Rushmore of the Buffalo Wings, and I'm going to finish off this episode with my thoughts on the topic. But since we played 23 seasons in the major leagues with the Buffalo Wings, I've also put together a list of what I think are the 23 players that you can't tell the story of the Buffalo Wings without. So obviously the 4 players who end up on the Buffalo Wings Mount Rushmore are going to come from this list. But for those of you who have been with us throughout the series, here's a look back in the coming minutes as some of the players who wouldn't have told this same story without. Sincere Shazier is a player that we drafted in the 4th round who ended up becoming a very important pitcher for us over the course of our history. In Buffalo, he had a 124-66 record and almost 300 starts, a career ERA of 3.65. And Sungo Shazier was a member of our first 3 World Championship teams before we moved on from him. He was a guy who was really kind of struggling in the minors, and then all of a sudden some talent change randomness really worked in his favor. And you can see in his excellent career with the Buffalo Wings, 9 full seasons with us, he never had a losing record. And as I noted, was a member of 3 of our championship teams. Andrew Painter was an important guy. He was one of the trades early in this run-through. You can see we traded for him in 2027, which was our second major league season in Buffalo. Gave us immediate credibility with a solid major league starter. And although he was never overwhelming as a starter for us until probably his final year when he was 12-6, I guess that's still not overwhelming. But he got his ERA under 4 finally that year. And then we transitioned him into a bullpen role, and he was kind of the first player that we ever used as a stopper in Buffalo. 93 games, 30 holds, and 143 innings in his first year in that role. After that, he was versatile for us, moved him back into the rotation, then primarily in the pen, and then his final year with us before we moved on from him back in the bullpen as well. Overall, over the course of his career, pitched almost 1,400 innings for us, 77 wins, 10 saves, 49 holds, put up a 21 WAR over the course of his career. I guess I didn't note Shazier's WAR in Buffalo. He put up a 27.4 WAR over the course of his career. Third man on the list is Shohei Ohtani. In this parallel universe that we ran in starting in 2023. He ultimately left the Angels for the Cubs, opted out of a contract there, and then we signed him to a 6-year deal, and he was the first big-time signing that we made in Buffalo. Brought a level of credibility to the organization. Until I think his last year or two, we weren't using two-way players in the game. So he was primarily a pitcher for us, and you can see over the course of his 6 seasons with us as a pitcher, never had a losing record and put up a 23.4 WAR. Missed out on what he could have done with the bat because there was close to a decade after he left the Angels, or I guess even including his last season in the Angels when I didn't have two-way players turned on. Even at the age of 37, he had 27 homers and 79 ribbies for us. Would have been a lot more interesting if we had seen what he could have done as a batter over the course of that entire career. But we all make decisions that we regret. But Ohtani was our first big-time signing and had a very solid career for us as a starter. Lorne Walborn mentioned that Painter was the first guy that we had in the stopper role for us in 2032. In 2034, we picked up Walborn in a trade with the Dodgers, and he became one of the top stoppers in the game. Led the league in games and holds for us 4 consecutive years. By 2038, had some injury issues, and we decided, we didn't decide to move on from him. We played a little bit of hardball with him in negotiations. He decided to sign and go back to the Dodgers, even though he was from not too far away in Quebec from where he was playing in Buffalo, and his career really collapsed after that. 3 years after he left Buffalo, his major league career was over with ERAs in excess of 8 for both San Francisco and Texas. But the run with Buffalo was excellent, a 2.96 ERA over 385 games pitched, and a 13.3 WAR for his Buffalo career. Adley Rutschman, if Ohtani was the first big free agent signing we made, Rutschman was certainly the second, joining us in 2029, was our starting catcher for 6 years before his career finished with us and he retired. Was never the brilliant player that we thought we might be getting when he was coming off of those 150-plus WRC seasons with the Orioles, but he was still a solid player through his early and mid-30s, was a well above average offensive player every year except the final year of his career. Ultimately in Buffalo, not quite the same level of success that he had in Baltimore, but still put up a 22.9 WAR over the course of his career with his good offense and good defense. And he was also a member of the first Buffalo Wings World Championship team in 2034, which was his final season in the majors. The next 2 players' accomplishments on the field are going to pale in comparison to some of the other players we'll be talking about, but still critical to telling the story of the Buffalo Wings. Andres Medina is a player that we signed as an international amateur free agent in 2024, so the first international amateur free agent period we had. He was one of the top handful of prospects in baseball for quite some time. And then he just wasn't developing with the bat the way that we hoped. So he was actually the player that we traded to the Phillies in exchange for Painter. They continued to develop him over the years. We were watching that from afar. And then several years later, we traded back for him to bring him onto our team. Always looked at him as a player who was going to be a potentially outstanding defensive catcher. Who could provide some home run pop in his bat. And during his tenure in Buffalo, he certainly did that. Was never a superstar, but had a .254 career average with 70 home runs in 2002 at-bats, put up a 17.5 WAR over the course of his career, and he was a good defensive catcher, as I talked about, over the course of his career. I guess I can't see, I guess these are just his total stats, not broken out by team, but you can see a 10.6 zone rating and 1.044 defensive efficiency as a catcher. Only threw out a quarter of the runners that were attempting to run against him, but a catcher ERA of 3.81 for his career and 127.7 in framing runs. Was at many times an absolutely outstanding defensive catcher. You can see he ended up being a perennial all-star when all was said and done, and he was a member of our first two World Championship teams in 2034 and 2036 before we did move on from him. Samuel Basallo, a guy that we ended up picking up in a trade and bringing into our organization, and he was kind of the most effective slugger on our team for many years and was actually the all-time home run leader for Buffalo for an extended period of time. Ended up in just parts of 5 seasons in Buffalo with 156 home runs, which I believe still ranks 4th on the club's all-time list. Drove in over 100 runs in each of his first 3 years in the majors. Hit over 30 home runs 3 times for us in the 5 years with us. The career batting average in Buffalo was .250, but it was kind of a general trend downwards over the course of his career. After we moved on from him, he played just 1 more year in the majors at the age of 30, knocked around in the minors for several seasons, but never got back to the majors after that year with Washington in 2035. Did end up winning 3 Silver Sluggers while with us, as well as the Rookie of the Year, and was an All-Star a couple times. He was also one of the probably most controversial players in the early stages of this playthrough. A lot of commenters thought the guy was a complete bum, and honestly, you put up a 2 WAR on average in 162 games, so there were certainly flaws in his game. He struck out a ton, didn't hit for a great average, and didn't walk all that much, but was still a very important offensive player for us at one time. And speaking of important offensive players, mentioned him earlier that he's now 2 years away from first being on the Hall of Fame ballot. But Deshaun Seifu is clearly first among equals on the Mount Rushmore of the Buffalo Wings franchise. He is a player who we picked number 1 overall in 2026 out of Fordham, and he was playing in the major leagues by late that year, brought him up for good around the All-Star break of the next season, and over the course of his career, he stole more bases than anyone in baseball history except for Rickey Henderson. He led the league in steals a ridiculous 15 consecutive years, even more than Henderson. And you can see he won a batting title, led the league in doubles and triples, hits, runs, and at-bats many times over the course of his career. Ultimately finished with 3,229 hits, over 700 doubles, and almost 200 triples. He's in the top 10 all-time in both of those categories. .290 career hitter with a Buffalo Wings franchise best 84 WAR. I'll save you the suspense, and Seifu is certainly on the Mount Rushmore of the Buffalo Wings. Mike Heiner is a player that we drafted in the first round. He was drafted originally by Detroit and didn't sign with them. He was drafted by Philadelphia and didn't sign with them. By 2032, we picked him 32nd overall out of Bradley, signed a minor league contract with us, and we quickly signed him to a major league deal. Felt like he was a guy that we were going to be building around. Really got off to a fantastic start in his career with 143 and 139 WRC pluses the first 2 years of his career, winning a Rookie of the Year in 2033 and being an all-star in each of those seasons. We also won a World Series title in his second year, and then he was a member of our second World Series team a couple years later. But after those first couple years, he still was a above average offensive player, but not as dynamic as he used to be. And by the time he was 30, he had been kind of consistently for almost a season and a half performing at a below average offensive level. So we decided to trade him away and move on from him. Ended up, as you can see here, kind of very well traveled over those last 4 years of his career after we traded away from him. Never really find a full-time spot with anybody, unfortunately. But his career with Buffalo was certainly solid. Over 1,100 hits, 142 homers, 142 steals. He was a two-way threat, 114 WRC plus, and a 17.9 WAR. Shamar Jenneret has perhaps one of the most brightly shining careers in the history of the Buffalo Wings. You can see incredibly decorated overall over the course of his career. Only 3 full seasons in Buffalo. He was a free agent signing, though, that we made in the 2033 to 2034 offseason. By then, we were a regular playoff team, but we had been never able to kind of get over the hump as far as winning it all. And the issue was our offense. So coming off of a year in 2033 when he led the league in homers and ribbies, we signed him to a big contract as a free agent out of the Texas Rangers organization. 7 years, $280 million. It was a huge contract for the Buffalo Wings at the time. But Jenneret kind of ended up proving to be the missing link for us. He was with us for 3 years before he opted out of that contract, led the league in runs batted in each of those 3 seasons. We won World Series with him in 2034 and 2036, so he was on our first 2 World Series teams, and he was the World Series MVP each of those years. The year that we didn't win it all, 2035, he won the NL MVP, giving him a Most Valuable Player award in each league. After he opted out of the contract, we decided to go a little more economical rather than bringing him back. He struggled for a couple years with injuries and then ended up having a nice run his final 3 years with the Red Sox with 40, 32, and 35 home runs. We ended up reuniting him very briefly in the early stages of the 2045 season. He went 1 for 11 with us before we moved on from him, and he signed with Pittsburgh, was a little better there before he finally retired at the age of 40. A very brief Buffalo career, but 119 homers and 394 ribbies with a 13.4 WAR in 3 seasons plus 4 games. Demonstrates how effective he was when he was with us. 146 WRC plus over the course of his career. He happened to retire the same year as Deshaun Seifu. 44.8 WAR for his career, so definitely not in the same stratosphere in terms of his overall production as Seifu. But with over 1,500 career ribbies, almost 500 homers, those 2 MVP awards, and a perennial All-Star and Silver Slugger winner. Still very interested in seeing what type of support blanks Jenneret gets when he is eligible for the Hall of Fame in 2 years, along with Seifu. Next guy we'll talk about is Jace Barofin, and Barofin is on this list. He was the first round pick we ever made, 20th overall in 2023 when we were just starting to build this team. Moved up through our minor league system over 3 years, and when we started playing Major League Baseball in 2026, he was our everyday right fielder. We signed him to a long-term contract, and it was a pretty reasonable contract. He was a player who came out of Arkansas, so he was pretty ready for the majors by the time our team started playing in the majors. His best season was probably his rookie year, at least with us. 24 homers, 88 ribbies, a 111 WRC plus. After that, he was honestly closer to a league average player for his last 4 years with the Buffalo Wings. We ended up trading him to the Yankees, though, and the left-handed hitter really enjoyed that short porch in right field. Hit a career-high 33 homers his first year with the Yankees, and drove in a career best 94 runs his second year with the Yankees. Came back to us in 2035 when he was more of a utility outfielder, and then he went back to finish up his career with the Yankees. So pretty even in terms of the amount of time he played in each organization. He had 2 more at-bats over the course of his Yankees career, 2 more games started, a few more homers, a few fewer doubles, 114 WRC plus with the Yankees, 107 WRC plus with our Buffalo Wings, a 10.3 WAR. But as the first number 1 pick of our organization and a guy who we at one point thought we'd be building around for the long term, Barofin certainly merits mention as one of the 23 most important Buffalo Wings that we can't tell the story of the Wings without. And while nobody measures up to Seifu in the history of the Buffalo Wings franchise, Alexis Barajas is certainly the greatest pitcher in Buffalo Wings history. You can see he's still a free agent right now. He spent this last year after we finally moved on from him in AAA, and he's still looking to get back into the majors. But with his ratings, I think it's probably going to be a challenge for him. Barajas is a guy we made a monster trade for. Felt like we needed an ace pitcher to finally get this team over the hump, so we traded for him in mid-2034. That was the first season with Jenneret, as we've already talked about, and it ultimately was the first season that we won a World Series championship. We sent a huge package to the Miami Marlins for him. Drake Purvis, an excellent pitcher, part of that. Gavin Grahovac, Dave Zapf, some familiar names who had decent or excellent careers over the course of their major league careers. But once we brought him from Miami, he basically took over as our number 1 starter for most of the next decade and a half. Great run for us in Buffalo. You can see he never had a losing season in the parts of 14 years that he spent with Buffalo. Led the league in wins a couple of times, led the league in ERA in 2036, which is the year that he won his 1 Cy Young Award with a 17-7 record, 2.21 ERA. Fewest walks in the league, even as a veteran in those final seasons in Buffalo, and led the league in FIP minus once. For his career, he's got a 68.2 WAR, so he will likely be a pretty strong Hall of Fame candidate. 207 and 95 was his record in Buffalo, with almost 2,500 strikeouts and a 3.29 ERA. His 55.6 WAR is the second most in team history, behind only Seifu. So like Seifu, Barajas is an obvious member of our Mount Rushmore, so number 2 on the list is Alexis Barajas. Vance Honeycutt ended up kind of being our first true homegrown star. He didn't sign with the Giants in 2021. We ended up drafting him out of UNC in 2024, and he was an 8th rounder. So he wasn't someone who we necessarily had high expectations for when we picked him up, but it wasn't too long till he was in the majors with us, and he had a really nice 6 or 7 year run in Buffalo. He was an all-star in 2029, 2030, and 2031. Won a Silver Slugger in 2031, and after he left us, he won a Wild Card Series MVP award with the Braves in 2036. But we did move on from him right before our first World Series championship that offseason. Let him hit free agency. Felt like since he was coming off of a 236 and 238 average the last 2 seasons he was in Buffalo, with WRC pluses that were just a bit above league average, felt like his best years were probably behind him. And it ended up being accurate. You can see he spent his final 4 years in Atlanta before retiring at 34, and just a 92 WRC plus over that time. But in Buffalo, a 120 WRC plus over almost 1,000 games played. He's high up the franchise record book in many offensive categories, and put up a 26.4 WAR over the course of his career. Joe Edwards is a guy that many who watched this series really liked, and some were disappointed when we finally did move on from him after a long run in Buffalo. He was, until very recently, the all-time leader in home runs for Buffalo with 163. Only a career 234 hitter, but a 119 WRC plus. He was very good at drawing walks, led the league in walks twice with us and once more with Boston, and ended up over the course of his Buffalo career putting up an 18.6 WAR. Was primarily a third baseman, but had the capability to play many positions around the field. And for those of you who have been watching us more recently, we're starting to get into the more familiar names of the players who are all still active in the majors on this list. Ishmael Velasco is our center fielder, a guy who has had a great run with us. He has been a member of our last 5 World Championship teams, and Velasco was MVP of our 3rd, 4th, and 5th World Series Championship teams as an organization. So he has been a clutch postseason player, but also a very good offensive player over the course of his career during the regular season. He was a mid-range $2.5 million international amateur free agent when we brought him on board. He's now spent close to a decade in Buffalo, led the league in runs once, led the league in triples once, and has just been a very consistent offensive performer. 118 WRC plus over the course of his career. The 130 mark that he just put up this year at the age of 30 was the second best in his career. He was a Rookie of the Year for us back in 2041, and he's also a 2-time All-Star who, as I noted, a member of 5 World Championship teams for us. 33 WAR over the course of his career already. He could be nearing the end of his tenure in Buffalo. We accepted the team option for this upcoming year at $16 million, but as I talked about at the beginning of the episode, it's not inconceivable to me that a year from now at this time, the new general manager of the Wings may look to move on from him as our center fielder. Josh Porter is a guy who was in and out of the starting lineup in his tenure with Buffalo. On paper, he always looked like a pretty incredible player, but at times we struggled to get him in the starting lineup and used him more as a starter against left-handed pitching, and then a guy who was a backup against right-handed pitching and a pinch hitter for us. But he ended up spending 7 seasons in Buffalo, perhaps capping off his career in Buffalo a couple years ago with maybe his best year with us when he led the National League with 126 runs scored. We let him leave as a free agent, but he was a very productive offensive player through most of his career in Buffalo. Again, there are those 3 seasons when he didn't even start 80 games, and generally wasn't because of injuries. It was because he was kind of our 4th outfielder against righties and then starting against left-handed pitching. But ultimately, over the course of his Buffalo career, he had 204 doubles, 117 homers, and a 25.9 WAR because he's also a pretty solid defensive player, and he was also pretty good on the base paths with 126 steals in 144 attempts in the Wings organization. Juan Estrada, unlike Shohei Ohtani, actually had the opportunity to be a 2-way player for the Buffalo Wings, and he did a great job for us while he was with us. He was a member of our first 2 championship teams and was also a 3-time playoff series MVP. He, for the better part of a decade, was our number 2 hitter against right-handed pitching when he was able to be in the lineup. So he was often batting right behind Deshaun Seifu, which was certainly an advantageous position to be, with the fact that in some of those years he had Shamar Jenneret right behind him. But over the course of almost a decade in Buffalo, he put up a 293 average and a 122 WRC plus. Not a great power hitter, but 253 doubles in just 2,828 at-bats and 29 triples illustrate his speed. He also stole 112 bases, but he was not actually a very effective runner on the base paths in terms of stealing. Very inefficient, quite honestly, but still put up a 15-point WAR for us as an offensive player who, as I noted, often was batting number 2 for us. But where he really made his mark with the Buffalo Wings was as a pitcher. And over the course of his career in Buffalo, he had a 101-58 record, primarily as a starter for us, 3.57 career ERA, and he put up a 24 WAR as a pitcher. So had some really nice years for us, led the league with a 2.69 ERA in 2035. Interestingly, despite his exploits at the plate and on the mound, never actually named an all-star over the course of his career. He's coming off of elbow decompression surgery on the radial nerve, still injured 3 weeks. He's 41 years old, but even though he only pitched 1 game for the Padres last year, he is still trying to find a job for the 2049 season. Joe Scott ended up being the top closer, at least in terms of saves, in the history of the Buffalo Wings franchise. We made a big trade with the Padres for him, envisioning him as someone who could stabilize the closer role for us, and he did for many seasons, 8 overall during that time period. You can see he was our closer when he was healthy. Led the league twice with a career high of 52 in 2040. He was a member of 3 World Series championship teams for us. We did let him leave as a free agent a couple of years ago, and you can see he's continued to be a pretty successful closer for the Giants and the Cardinals, although his ERA ballooned to a career high 4.17 this year. But in his Buffalo career, the 337 saves that he posted in those 8 seasons in Buffalo, by far the most in franchise history, had a 2.50 career ERA, struck out 11.3 batters per 9 innings, and put up a 16.9 WAR for us over the course of his time in Buffalo. Ramiro Medina is a guy who we traded for from Pittsburgh several years ago now, and he has been a member of our last 4 World Series championship teams. A good, solid player at second base. He's above average hitter. He's above average defensively. He's above average on the base paths. You can see in the course of his Buffalo career, which is now over 900 games, 118 WRC plus. He's got 144 homers, 148 stolen bases, a career WAR closing in on 30 at this point, and he should be with this franchise for many years to come, or at least several years to come, as we signed him to a 5-year extension last offseason. Still will likely be with the team at least 3 years unless they trade him away, and then he's got a player option at the age of 33. Jim Lance, a starting pitcher, a guy who we picked in the 2nd round back in 2036, hoping he could become an ace for us, and that is exactly what he has become. He's led the league in wins once, ERA once, WHIP 3 times, walks per 9 innings once, strikeout to walk ratio once, FIP minus once, and WAR once over the course of his now 9 seasons in Buffalo, 8 of which are full seasons. He's won 108 games while losing 47 and put up a WAR of almost 40, which is the 3rd highest mark in team history. He also has been brilliant overall in the postseason with a 14-6 career record, 3.21 ERA in the playoffs, and a 5.6 WAR over 34 games and 32 starts, which is basically a full season. The last 2 years, he has been absolutely brilliant in the playoffs, going 4-0 each of the last 2 seasons in the playoffs with sub 2 ERAs. and 52 strikeouts over those 2 playoff runs, both of which culminated in championships. He's been a member of our last 5 championship teams. He is a guy who is signed for another 3 years before he can potentially opt out, so he will likely be continuing his career in Buffalo for some point going forward. And with that 39.9 career WAR, being a big-time player on 5 world championship teams, he'll certainly be getting some strong consideration to join Seifu and Barajas on the Buffalo Wings Mount Rushmore. Danny Black is a guy who's on here more as a representative of the future of Buffalo. First-round pick out of high school in 2041, and he is off to a fantastic start in his career. 6-1 career record in the playoffs, although the 4.04 ERA is not necessarily exceptional. But in 3 seasons in the majors, he's already put up a 51-16 record, led the league in wins as a rookie, and this year he led the league in fewest walks per 9 and strikeout to walk ratio while putting up a 6.8 WAR. He's an all-star in 2048 this past year. He was a divisional series a year ago, and he's been a member of our last 2 world championship teams. This is a guy who we haven't signed to a long-term contract. My hope is that the new leadership of Buffalo will ensure that he spends his whole career with the team, but has certainly made a big mark in the 3 seasons that he has been in the majors. Speaking of making a mark, Floyd Auclair, a guy who we traded for with Toronto several years ago, didn't love that he didn't have great stamina, but he does have an incredible 3-pitch arsenal. Thought we could potentially use him as a starting pitcher, which is what Toronto was doing. And we did use him as a starter his first year in Buffalo when he went 11-7 with a 2.85 ERA. But then, thanks to reader suggestions and our own curiosity, we ended up moving him into the stopper role. And over these last 6 years, he's led the league in games 5 times, led the league in holds 6 times, and he has won 3 Mariano Rivera Awards while becoming a perennial all-star and a member of our last 4 World Series championship teams. Overall with Buffalo, he's got 59 wins, 25 saves, 213 holds, and a ridiculous 1,394 strikeouts in 965 and a third innings, 13 strikeouts per 9 innings, and a 27 WAR over the course of his career. He has, somewhat amazingly, struck out over 200 batters twice while working as a relief pitcher. And last, but certainly not least on the list, like Black, Jim Reichert is more of a nod to the future of this franchise. One of the top prospects in baseball who we engineered a blockbuster with the Dodgers for several years ago. And he has become the modern-day Shamar Jenneret for us. He's led the league in ribbies 3 consecutive years, led the league in homers once. In that 2046 season, he was named the National League Most Valuable Player when he led the league with a 163 WRC+, as well as the insane 53 homers and 145 ribbies. He is a member of the last 4 World Series championship teams as well, 2-time Silver Slugger, only a 1-time All-Star. But even though he is only 28 years old and he's only played parts of 5 years with the Buffalo Wings, with 165 career home runs towards the end of this year, he became the franchise's all-time leader in home runs. And he is also signed for many years to come. So the hope is that the Wings can keep him with the franchise over the next half-decade plus and see him perhaps eclipsing the 300, 400, and maybe even 500 home run marks in a Buffalo Wings uniform. So before I name my Mount Rushmore, which is really just 2 more heads on the mountain since we know who 2 of them are going to be. Quick look at the career leaders in statistics. Several 300 hitters over the course of single seasons, but we don't have a 300 hitter over the course of his career. kind of one thing that I don't love about current baseball is that you don't generally have tons of guys who are perennial 300 hitters. It seemed a lot more common in the 80s and even in the 90s when I was growing up watching the game, and the likes of Rod Carew, George Brett, Wade Boggs, Tony Gwynn, Don Mattingly, Paul Molitor, into the likes of Derek Jeter more recently, but haven't had that type of player in the Buffalo Wings organization, but part of it is the era of baseball that we've been playing with. On base percentage, Daniel Rojas, who we didn't talk about, is one of the 23 most pivotal players, 400 on base percentage a few years ago for us. Juan Estrada, with his great ability to draw walks, the best over his career. Not surprisingly, Jenneret and Reichert, the top slugging percentages over their career. Reichert, in his MVP seasons, the highest slugging percentage in team history. OPS for a single season, Reichert in his MVP season, Shamar Jenneret overall. Single season WAR, not surprisingly, Deshaun Seifu. As we talked about, single season career, not surprisingly, Deshaun Seifu. He's still twice any other hitter in the history of this franchise. Runs over the course of the career, we talked about Seifu, should be a Hall of Famer shortly in just a couple years, almost 1,800 runs. Porter's got the team record, though. Hits in a single season, clearly Seifu, although Havisham recently topped him for the most in a single season by somebody in Buffalo. Total bases, obviously Seifu, although Reichert's MVP year and Jenneret's MVP year were the two highest in team history. Not surprisingly, Seifu leads in singles, doubles, and triples as well. Reichert, as we just talked about, just passed Joe Edwards for number one on the all-time home run list, and he's also got two of the top 4 seasons in home run history at this point, along with his teammate Arturo Casares, who we could have certainly mentioned is a key player in our future as well. Seifu, just by virtue of having played so long, is the all-time leader in ribbies. Would have to think that the likes of Reichert and Casares could get by him over the next 4 or 5 years if they remain healthy and with the team. Seifu, clearly the team leader in steals, walks over the course of his career, hit by pitch, strikeouts, pretty much leads the team in everything over the course of his brilliant career. Turning to the pitchers, Nehemiah Vidale just posted the lowest ERA in a single season for us at 1.83. Joe Scott, former closer, has the career mark at 250, although a good season or two from Floyd Auclair, and he could get ahead of Scott. Wins in a single season, Jorge Carrillo over a decade ago and Joey Bills in this past season both had 21. You can see Bills, Lance, and Nehemiah Vidale all had 20 wins this year. Danny Black had 19, so we were one win away in this brilliant 2048 season from becoming the third team in history with 4 20-game winners. Barajas, clearly the winningest pitcher in team history. Barajas also, by virtue of having played all those years, leads the team in career losses. Danny Black, the youngster, with a 761 winning percentage, and Jim Coles, number 2 overall. See a lot of our recent pitchers on the team: Jim Lance, Barajas, Floyd Auclair, Simeon Manelli, guys who have been on this team in recent years when we have been our most dominant. Mentioned that Joe Scott was the all-time career leader, over 100 more than Bryce Miller. Our current closer, Chris McClintock, has been moving up the list. Career WAR among the pitchers, Barajas number 1 clearly, Jim Lance actually pretty clearly number 2, and Lance, if he stays with us another 3 or 4 years, does have a chance of getting by Barajas for the most WAR among pitchers in team history. You can see the two-way player Juan Estrada ranks 5th overall in career WAR. Floyd Auclair, the stopper, and Joe Scott, the closer, have pitched the most games in Buffalo history. Nate Ruckle and Bryce Miller, also over 500 games pitched. Barajas, clearly the most games started in his career. kind of crazy, a youngster, Joey Bills, who just completed his first season as a starter, is the career leader in complete games with 4. Kind of shows how the game has changed from the old days. Andrew Painter with 3 shutouts is the career leader in that. And not surprisingly, Barajas leads in a lot of the counting categories: innings pitched, hits allowed, homers allowed, walks allowed. Walks per 9, Danny Black and Barajas 1-2. Career strikeouts, not surprisingly, Barajas. Strikeouts per 9, not surprisingly, Auclair. Strikeout to walk ratio, though, back to Mr. Barajas. Career whip favors Auclair. And on with the other metrics, where, again, you're going to see Floyd Auclair and Alexis Barajas as the leaders in most of them. So it's been a fun run. As I mentioned at the outset, really appreciate all of the thoughts, all of the comments, all of the camaraderie, and all of the online friendships that have been developed over the course of this long playthrough. We're still going to have a few more episodes coming up when we kind of sim through and find out what happens with those Hall of Fame votes for Seifu and Jenneret, and then also what happens to this team over the longer term. So while this is kind of the last real long and involved episode, there will certainly be some more coming. So I'm interested in those of you who have watched this episode, and especially if you've kind of watched us over the years, who you think should be on the Mount Rushmore. I have come up with my 4 names. We already talked about Deshaun Seifu, clearly the greatest player in franchise history. We've already talked about Alexis Barajas, clearly the best pitcher in franchise history, although he's going to be pressured by Jim Lance. And Jim Lance, with that WAR of close to 40, third most in team history, and that 14-6 career mark over the course of his postseason career, is the third player that's going to be on our Mount Rushmore. It came down to 4 players to me for the last spot. Shamar Jenneret, 3 times leading the league in ribbies in 3 seasons, 2 world championships, including the first in team history, which, having his bat in the lineup, was pivotal towards getting us. 2-time World Series MVP and a 1-time National League MVP in his 3 years with us. Certainly very impressive. Floyd Auclair, great career ERA, dominant as a stopper for us. Highest strikeout to inning pitched ratio in team history, and a WAR that is quickly becoming one of the highest among any pitcher in the history of the franchise, also on the list. Ishmael Velasco, starting center fielder for close to a decade, Rookie of the Year, perennially well above average offensive player, member of the last 5 World Series championship teams, and a guy who was a 3-time World Series MVP was also considered. And the last guy that I personally had in the mix was Juan Estrada, 2-way player, was never the best offensive player on the team, was never the best pitcher on the team, but still over the course of his career put up the 5th highest WAR among any pitcher in team history, and also had that WAR we talked about as a hitter with Buffalo of 15.4 over the course of his career offensively as well. And it ended up being a very tough decision for me as to who the 4th member of the Buffalo Wings Mount Rushmore is, along with Seifu, Barajas, and Lance. I took Jenneret out of the equation. As great as he was, only 3 years and 4 days with the team, didn't feel like that was ultimately Mount Rushmore worthy. Floyd Auclair has been fantastic for us, a dominant stopper, but we've had several dominant stoppers over the run. So it came down to the 2-way player, Juan Estrada, and the center fielder Ishmael Velasco, as far as who I thought the fourth member of the Buffalo Wings Mount Rushmore should be. And my vote ultimately went with Ishmael Velasco. He is a 5-time playoff series MVP, including those 3 World Series MVPs. The 33 WAR that he's put up over the course of his career is the second highest among any hitter on the team, and I think it can go higher. I just think he was a higher-end player than Estrada was, as valuable as Estrada was as both a pitcher and a hitter. Velasco, particularly in the playoffs, has been incredible. Estrada, actually was also a very good playoff player as well, with several or multiple playoff series MVPs. But the thing that's most crazy to me about Ishmael Velasco is he is 31 years old at this point. He's put up a 118 career WRC plus in the playoffs, which is kind of right where he's been over the course of his career. But he has, at this point in his relatively young major league career, where he could be playing another decade, 34 doubles in the playoffs already. And even though Velasco just completed his age 30 season, he's already second all-time in career postseason doubles with those 34, ahead of Bernie Williams and Derek Jeter, and behind only his former teammate Deshaun Seifu. 1 or 2 more playoff appearances, and Velasco is likely the all-time leader in postseason history in terms of doubles. Not that that in and of itself is a reason to pick him over Estrada. I could make a case for any of those last 4 players I talked about. Honestly, I could make a case for other players as well, and very interested in those of you who have watched this summary and watched this series of who you would put on the Mount Rushmore for the Buffalo Wings. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a really interesting run. If you've got thoughts on what we should do next time around, down to 5 teams that I'm considering for our OOTP 25 playthrough. It's not going to be an expansion franchise. It's going to be a real team. So if there's thoughts from you on which direction I should go there, always interested in hearing them. And right now we've got a Yankees mini-series going with OOTP 25 as I play around with the new game. So it's been fun in Buffalo. It's been a real successful run, but it is time for me to officially hang up my clipboard and my computer and the sneakers that I wear when I'm out scouting people as the longtime general manager of the Buffalo Wings. So after a fun 26 seasons in Buffalo and over 10 months in real world time in OOTP 24, it's time for me to resign as general manager of the Buffalo Wings. Wish the team lots of success going forward, and we'll be following what happens in the future of the Buffalo Wings in our next episodes. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.